afternoon, councillors and staff and guests. Welcome to our council meeting. Thank you for being here. Just want to take a moment at the beginning of this meeting to acknowledge our previous alderman, Councillor Basil Fitch, who was very passionate about his role as an alderman, but also since he was left council, and I'm sure he's rung me a few times, he's rung some of you and had chats as well, so we'll have a minute's silence as you're aware that he passed away, and we pass on our condolences to his wife and family as well. Thank you. And just a reminder of mobiles, if you could have them switched off. And we welcome those that are listening online as well. Thank you. And another, just an announcement. You can sit down, please, that's fine. You would have heard previously that we've had the Barbers for Life project. I think we promoted that not so long ago. The mental health initiative from the Council and Suicide Prevention Trial. It's presented with a People's Choice Award at the Australian Men's Health Forum 2022, the Men's Health Award. So we congratulate them, and particularly I think we congratulate Stephanie Armour from our program who was involved with that. So, and all those involved, especially the barbers, did a great job. They really took it on board. So fantastic program. So we wish them well into the future, but look, well done, congratulations, and it's great for council to be recognised in that way with suicide prevention as well. Declaration of interest, any declaration of interest? Councillor? Thank you. Sorry? Oh, I missed apologies. Oh, my humble apology. Yeah, apologies, Councillor Mackenzie and Cox for today. Any other declaration of interest apart from Councillor Dakin? No? Confirmation minutes. Somebody happy to move the minutes of the council held 14th of July? Move Deputy Mayor, seconded Councillor Harris. All those in favour, raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. 5.1 Council Workshop Report. Someone happy to move? Councillor Harris and seconded Councillor Walker. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Harris? Councillor Walker? Any councillor wish to speak to it? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors. That is carried. Then we move on to public question time. So it's now time for public questions without notice. Any questions without notice?
Thank you. Ron Baines, Kings Meadows. An article in the Examiner in mid-June had a statement by our Launceston Mayor, Councillor Van Zanten, I'll quote, "As a council, we have a great ambition to see less traffic and more people out and about enjoying the city. That statement tends to exclude the elderly, the disabled or any group that require their own mode of transport to access our CBD area. In effect, it is a devious form of discrimination towards these people. My question is, how do you intend to restore the trust and faith in City of Launceston Council this statement has destroyed?"
I tend to disagree with your accusations or comments. I think what we're trying to do is make the city centre more friendly for the elderly, for those in wheelchairs, for those people that can't get around easily, make it so there's less traffic in there for them so they can get about the city and the CBD. We will still have disability parking, we'll still have taxis, we'll still have Ubers, we'll still have buses, so people can still choose their method of getting into town, but they'll have less traffic while they're in the middle of the CBD. We're only talking about a very small section of the CBD where this is referring to. You can still park within, I don't know, some of it you can park within 100 metres of where you want to go. So I'm not really sure what you're referring to. But that's my answer. I don't think it is. I think it's really making it more friendly and more suitable for people who need the space to want to walk around so there's not cars, there's not a lot of traffic around.
Well, how do people who need cars get into the city?
Well, they get in on the car like they do now and they'll park in a car park or in a disability spot or in a meter or wherever they like. They're still allowed to use their car. We haven't said anything about not using your car.
Well, I think my statement about discrimination still stands. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Well, that's your opinion. Thank you. Any other questions? No, thank you. So we have a 9.1 petitions, Northwest Memorial Hall. Somebody happy to move the petition? Moved Councillor Spencer, seconded Councillor Walker. Just to speak to it, Councillor Spencer? Walker? No. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. So under the provisions of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993, Council acts as a planning authority in regard to items included in Agenda Item 9, Planning Authority. Planning Authority in regard to items included in Agenda Item 9, Planning Authority. At 10 it should be, actually, I just noticed. I don't know why it says 9 there, but it's item 10. So 10.1. Have we got speakers? I haven't got a list of... Oh, good. I just thought I'd better check. We do have a speaker for item 10.1. Michelle Shilger?
Afternoon, Michelle Sliger.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I apologise for that.
No problem. I'm here just to make a brief statement on the application to 26 Beverly Hills Road. First, I'd like to thank you for your consideration of this application and just want to touch on a few points just to elaborate on the application slightly. We notice that there's a requirement to get a geotechnical report as part of the conditions, and we have no problem with that. We think that's fine, and that will also address any other concerns about retaining walls, driveways, access, that sort of thing. So we're very happy to act on that, if granted. I just want to elaborate slightly on the change of easement that was on the plan. It's not necessarily a trigger under the planning scheme, but it was addressed in the report. It was found that the easement's probably oversized for what's required. That was discussed with council prior to making the application with the infrastructure department, and it will be amended accordingly once the infrastructure is detected on the title. Just finally want to touch on the community concern on tree and vegetation removal, which I have addressed previously in a response to the representations. And just want to say that it is sometimes necessary to manage vegetation, but generally and mostly people want to keep it for privacy and for other vegetation benefits. So I don't think that it would be a problem ongoing for the new lots. For new owners would most likely want to retain vegetation for the same reasons that the neighbours want to retain vegetation. So finally, I'll just say that the proposal is generally compliant with the provisions of the zone, and it can be fully serviced and meets the lot size criteria. And that's all I have. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Are there any other speakers for item 10.1? Thank you. So now item 10.1, someone have to put a motion for it. Councillor Harris, that's it. Seconded, Councillor Walker. Wish to speak to it, Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor. And yes, item 10.1 is a 3-lot subdivision at 26 Beverly Hills Road, Newstead. A rather large block at nearly half an acre in the old language of 2,000 square metres. Has an existing house at the front, and the intention is to subdivide and provide a driveway access to a 500 odd square metre block in straight behind the existing house, and a larger block at the bottom of the current block where the easement that was mentioned by the speaker is to be retained, is across there for sewerage or stormwater, and as such they can't build on top of it. So this is, I guess, an indication of the value of land. I'm sure when the land was first developed back in, probably the 1980s by the look of the houses, a 2,000 square metre block. Everyone thought it was too steep to perhaps build down the bottom of this. However, our new building techniques will, I'm sure, enable a house or unit to be built on that land. So I have no problem in supporting this motion to allow the subdivision of the block into the 3 blocks as presented, particularly with the acceptance of the geotech report to be done and the vegetation to be retained. But obviously, once we get some building applications, that may be a different case, and certainly not a requirement of this particular application to be retained.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Yeah, just briefly, thank you, Chair. Certainly in Launceston we are seeing that increase in pressure, and large blocks like this are ripe for subdivision or perhaps strata title, but in this case subdivision. And while we've all seen in Launceston areas that we thought perhaps would never be being built on, the technologies have changed, building techniques have changed, and this is an opportunity with the size of the land for additional housing. It will be interesting to see how the middle block is quite small and how they'll maintain staying within that envelope, and also the bottom block with the easement. It was interesting to hear that there may be some adjustments to that, but that'll also have its challenges, but nonetheless it's in an area that can easily afford to accommodate this, so I will be supporting the development application.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Harris, wish to close? I will put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. We move to 10.2. We do have a speaker for 10.2. Sharon Cameron.
Sharon Cameron, 17 Elfin Road in Launceston. I'm against the recommendation to change the use of Unit 2, 1 Elfin Road, from residential to visitor accommodation. I do not own a unit there, and I don't know anyone who does. However, I note that the residents of the complex that have objected to the application cite the issue of noise as a major concern. The recommendation states, and I quote, "The proposed change of use is very unlikely to increase noise, as the applicant has indicated the intention is to target professional employees who require fully furnished accommodation for short durations. It is considered that the noise generated by the short-term accommodation will be comparable to a long-term tenant," unquote. However, once the application is granted for visitor accommodation, that's it. As far as I am aware, the council is not going to monitor who actually tenants the unit or for how long. What if the applicant has a change of mind and decides to use this for holidaymakers? The recommendation states that the grantee of the application will not cause an unreasonable loss of residential amenity. The issue of noise is very much an issue of residential amenity. I respectfully request that you listen to and act on the concerns of the residents in the complex regarding this matter. They are the ones who know and understand the limitations of this building regarding noise, not short-term tenants who come and go and have no vested interest in the amenity of the building as a whole, nor town planners, unless they have monitored the unit in the building at various times of the day and night to understand the issue properly. Importantly, the unit is situated in an area that is already well serviced by short-stay accommodation. Surely we don't need any more at the expense of the local community. Whilst the broader issue of housing availability may not technically be within the scope of the planning scheme, the way this city develops and grows is definitely a council responsibility. Launceston is a great place to live, not just visit, and it is unacceptable to allow residential accommodation to be turned into visitor accommodation if it is likely to impact the peace and quiet of people who already live there, and that is within the scope of the planning provision. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers for item 10.2? Somebody happy to move a motion? Councillor Harris, move. Seconded. Councillor Dawkins. I have a question from Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor. My only concern with this one was the noise. Just wondering if we know if the top floor has got a concrete floor or is it timber?
Richard, can you answer that? Or?
Yeah, we have made some inquiries and we believe we've been informed that it's concrete.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, Councillor Harris, wish to speak to it?
I will, thank you, Mayor. So this is a planning application that has come before us because of the strata title of the building with a number of units on number 2 Elfin Road. So this is something that would normally a request for a short-term accommodation would in fact be handled without coming to council, but because this was a strata title development, it actually, and people had to advertise that they were using the building or intended to use the building for short-term, it allowed the local residents to raise their objections, which is somewhat different to if you had a single house on the side of the street on its own title. There would probably be no such advertising, depending on various constraints. And if Richard wanted to explain that, I'd let him do it, but I don't think it's necessary. So it's interesting from our point of view that as a council we're now actually making judgment on this particular item. It is something that, as Councillor Spencer said, the building with a concrete floor actually provides reasonable soundproofing between floors, you would imagine. And I do feel that the reporting of short-term or Airbnb party houses by the media exaggerates greatly what in fact happens in 99.9% of the Airbnb users that use short-term accommodation. And short-term accommodation has a very good place in the market. If you're a family, and particularly if you have young family members, a hotel is simply sometimes not an appropriate place. Perhaps they might have conjoining rooms, but perhaps not. Whereas short-term accommodation actually meets that family requirement very nicely. So we are somewhat conflicted by that. However, the residents of number 2 Elfin Road, through their body corporate, have a means that they can actually resolve this issue. Not for this particular planning issue, but for any future potential ones, by simply introducing their own law as part of the body corporate that may restrict short-term rentals. And in fact, it's probably a good lesson for all body corporates out there to perhaps have a look, and if they do not want short-term rental hire in their body corporate, that perhaps they ought to address their own rules to ban it, because that is their right to do so and has nothing to do with the planning scheme. So in this particular case, yes, the location is ideal for short-term. It is close to the CBD. It does have a parking spot. The parking spot is accessible through a common garage, and clearly they would have to get the remote to open the garage door once they've gained access to the apartment. But that garage then exits to the street and they enter the unit directly from the street. So they don't go down any corridors or anything like that, which would perhaps make more of a noise. I'd also think that this particular location would be very useful for what I'll call short to medium term hire. So when a new executive moves to Launceston and wants to set up home for 2 or 3 months while he reviews what houses are available, this is the type of person that could be being targeted. Once again, I don't see that as a particular problem for this particular set of units. And of course, all unit holders, regardless of whether they own the unit or whether they're renting the unit long term or they're there just overnight, have responsibilities to other unit holders and in fact to not break the law and make noise, and there are noise provisions and there are means that they can be raised and reporting to police or otherwise should a wild party break out. However, against that, most Airbnb users, should it become an Airbnb user, is then rated by the host to say how good a guest they were. So in fact, there is a great incentive to not have a party or otherwise if you are a legitimate Airbnb user. So I feel that people are running and jumping at shadows in this particular case, and I have no problem in supporting this application at this time to make this a short-term accommodation planning application.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you. I support this application with reservation, but understanding that under the planning scheme, the issues which a number of representatives indicated are not addressed under the planning scheme. But I'd just like to point out that today, further in this agenda, we'll be discussing the issue of homelessness when we discuss our advisory committee, the selection criteria and its objectives. So other councils around Tasmania, around Australia and other parts of the world have instigated bylaws to restrict the amount of short-term accommodation because they could see that there was a clear pathway between allowing more short-stay accommodation and housing insecurity. Now, if that is occurring in Launceston, we really hope that our advisory committee will be able to establish this and then be able to feed back into council at a later date. In that instance, we could then bring in a bylaw which could change this. But today, as it stands, we don't have that capacity. So as I indicated, I'm going to support it with reservation and keep an open mind as to the future of short-term accommodation in our city, because the last thing that we want to do is promote somebody's financial gain at the expense of a vulnerable person's roof over their head, because for somebody who has multiple properties and many income streams, as opposed to somebody who doesn't even have a roof over their head, for me that's not a level playing field. But we don't know that yet. Hopefully in months or years to come we'll have a better understanding of what's happening in our community and how we can further support more people into secure housing.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor. I rise to say that I won't be supporting this DA that is before us today. I concur with lots of the comments that have been made by Councillor Dawkins, and I reiterate, as I have done on a statewide basis on Council's behalf at the Local Government Association, we are calling out for the state government to help us in this space. There is not enough regulation, there is simply not enough control, and we find ourselves in these situations time and time again. Something like 25 of these ticked off already in the City of Launceston this year, according to the Manager of Planning this morning. There are clear issues with regard to the scheme, and there are clear issues with regard to this application, specifically relying on performance criteria with regard to visitor accommodation, specifically the privacy of residents. Now, you can't tell me that if you access your garage via an internal stairway and a locked garage, that you are going to be sharing with different people each night as a result of your neighbouring property being turned into a hotel, that is not going to impact your privacy. You just can't say that. If you have been using the internal staircase to get to your cars that are parked securely in a garage, and now you're going to be sharing those with strangers in the locked up garage night after night whilst the place next to you is being run as a hotel, then that is going to impact on the privacy of residents and probably the increase of noise as seen in dot point B. We are crying out to the state government for support and assistance and planning reform in this area of short-term accommodation, as is clearly evidenced by yet another application to this council today.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Chair. I too rise to not support this application. Look, it's on the one hand, it's fair enough not to conflate the issue of homelessness with an individual's application for Airbnb-style accommodation. It's no individual's fault or responsibility in that sense, but it is the somewhat cumulative effect that we're seeing. However, we're not here to discuss homelessness at this particular juncture, but we are here to discuss the fact that people live in accommodation, in residential accommodation, that they might reasonably expect they're sharing with other people in residential accommodation. Yes, it might be true that some people rent in that situation, but that is treated very much like your own home when you're renting, and you would expect someone to be afforded the same luxuries and conditions that someone who owns their own property would have, and that is that you have a certain amount of privacy in your space, so you have a certain amount of security in your space. Now, I'm not saying that this will necessarily take it away, but on the same token, we can't guarantee that it won't take that away. That's where the problem is. If we're to look at the exemptions and standards for visitor accommodation in the planning scheme, the Planning Directive number 6, there are quite a few areas where this could transgress those particular guidelines. The likely increase in noise to adjoining properties. Now, we're not to know. We can surmise that this might be someone staying there for 4 weeks at a time or 3 months at a time, but it might also be someone different there every night of the week. It might be the economic imperative, in this case, for the owner and the operator, is that there is more money to be made in making this available as an overnight stay accommodation. We're not to know. We can't surmise that, but it is a possibility, and that's the problem here, that there is that possibility of an increase of noise to adjoining properties. There is the possibility that you have shared space. Most of us, when we own a property, when we rent a property, we have a certain amount of security in the knowledge of what space we do rent, what space we do have access to, and what space we share with others. Well, in this case, you may well be sharing space, and it's hard to imagine, I'm sure, for any of us who own our own home or live in our own property, what that would be like to all of a sudden be sharing that space with someone else, albeit a car park, a basement in a building, a staircase, an outdoor corridor. Nonetheless, it is putting those things at jeopardy that you should assume, rightly so, are part of your rights as a tenant or an owner of a building. When people move into these buildings, they are not moving into them or not buying them thinking that the use is going to change, that somehow what they thought was a residential complex is now becoming a commercially operated complex. And I can well understand if you own a standalone property, doesn't have any shared walls, doesn't have any shared spaces, that might be a very reasonable thing for you to say, yes, you can rent it out on a night-by-night basis, you can rent it out weekly, monthly, yearly, whatever you might choose, without it impacting other people. But in this case, there's definitely that potential for that impact. That's the problem here. That's the problem that's not being addressed in the Planning Directive number 6 in regards to noise and the use and its compatibility with the surrounding character and uses within this area. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Harris, wish to close?
I will, Mayor, thank you. Thank you for the other speakers. I do still think we are somewhat jumping at shadows of what could be rather than what actually is. And I do feel that we are getting two obvious issues here conflicted about, homelessness and whether someone should convert a short-term, an existing property, whether it be owned and lived in or owned and rented out on a long-term basis into short-term hire. It's actually why I wrote to the General Manager yesterday requesting a motion for the Council officers to in fact investigate this and report back to us. That motion will be forthcoming at a future meeting, so we will start to address those issues of short-term hire, the effect on our local market, and also look at options that would help perhaps stem the tide, but also set sensible numbers of what actually is required for a city the size of Launceston. So that is all yet to be decided, and that is not what this debate is about. This debate is simply about whether this unit should be allowed to operate as a short-term hire. And what we have in front of us, and as Richard said to us this morning when we were on site, it is something that is normally just ticked off as being meeting the agreed things, but because it's a strata title, it's come back to us as a council. And we have probably 300 properties that are currently operating as short-term hires in Launceston. I'm not sure if any of them are known as party houses, but if you can name one, that's only 0.3 of 1%. So I really do think we need to not be jumping at shadows, and perhaps in the future, the body corporate laws for this particular structure, and in fact many others who might find themselves in similar things and say, we don't want this. Well, that's fine. You have a way forward, and this is nothing else has brought that to the surface, that people can control their own destiny if in the body corporate they say that no short-term hires are allowed. But in this particular case, there is no such rule, and therefore under the planning scheme, I would support this being used for this as short-term hire. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Those against? So that's 3 against, the rest are 4. The motion is carried. We go on to 10.3. And I think we have a speaker for 10, they've got the names, have they? Yes. Speaker for 10.3, Claire Ord.
Yes, good morning, councillors. My name is Claire Ord of Whitford Grove. I am speaking today as a representative of Design to Live. I would like to encourage this proposed development to be assessed against the criteria set out in the planning scheme, rather than personal bias. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers for 10.3? No, thank you. Someone happy to move a motion for 10.3? Councillor Harris moved as is. Councillor Walker seconded. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Harris?
Just briefly, this is a planning application to build a second story on an existing single-storey house at 9 Gretna Grove. The only planning discretion that is required is to do with the setback, where a very small amount of the roof of the new second story exceeds the building envelope. Now, Gretna Grove and that whole part of Norwood has been developed for a number of years, and for those people who live nearby, adding a second story will, of course, add or change their outlook when they look out their windows. However, I feel that this is such a small imposition and the building design that's been put forward to us today is one that is certainly worthy and deserves our support here today. And I think really there's not much more to say than that. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Yes, certainly I can understand why people have made representation against this. This is a change in their little neck of the woods, in their neighbourhood. It will mean, you know, a change of vista. Certainly it's not going to impact their amenity as such. There might be some small issues to do with privacy in regards to placement of windows and things like that, but I suppose it's very much in character with the buildings in that neighbourhood. There are single-storey and double-storey buildings, so it is typical of that area. It is well set back from the fence and well set back from other buildings on either side of the house. It's, as I say, understandable for anyone when change occurs in their area, but I think that this is entirely manageable, whether it's you know, with foliage and with other sort of aspects to the landscaping and that type of thing. And I would just say that it's also you know, typical of the area that there are two-storey buildings. They are well set back from fences generally, so I suppose yeah, it's entirely suitable for the area. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Harris, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. We now no longer sit as a planning authority. We go on to Mayor announcements, and thank you, Deputy, for allowing me some time away. I appreciate that. And just a few since I've been back, and one was obviously a citizenship ceremony on Tuesday at the tram sheds. Absolutely fantastic event again. 77 new citizens in this country, and very thankful and happy citizens to be here, but also from 21 different countries. And I think it's exciting when you see the number of countries that people come from, and it is really great to welcome them and to have them as part of our community. Some have been part of our community for some time already, but now they're officially Australians as well. And then on Wednesday, it was great to celebrate the Kings Meadows ABCDE learning site. And Councillor Harris was there as well, and it was, I want to thank our staff. Sarah in particular, it was, she does an amazing job. The feedback that I always get when I'm at these events from the people there, how great it is to work with Sarah and how she listens and she works and she gives some good ideas. So please pass that back on to Sarah if she's not listening, but it's, we appreciate that, and all the other staff that get involved. So it's really a great initiative, and now off to Invermaid. So I'll be interested to see how this continues to progress, and it's great to see some of the others like Youngtown. There's still projects happening that started, and the exciting thing for me will be if the projects that start, like at Kings Meadows or wherever, that they continue on and they don't just stop because council sort of pulls out of it, but it will continue to be a project, and other new projects will come up from the people who are passionate, and there are many passionate people in these communities, so it's really great to have them being active and wanting to continue to promote their community. And that's it from me. Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Just one slight correction, just an update on Wednesday the 20th of July. That should read Friday the 22nd of July, but everything is listed there. And I'd just draw your attention to the final night of the Launceston competitions, Mayor, which at the conclusion of 2 months was very appreciative of the support that Council through our events funding provides to facilitate the competitions.
Thank you. Any other council reports on activities of council? No? Council questions? Questions without notice. Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor. I've got a couple of questions, actually. The tender for the MTM asbestos removal at Mowbray, was the company rewarded with that contract, have the proper insurance, and did they have demolition licences?
CEO.
Yes.
Answer's yes.
Answer yes. They had the proper insurances when they were awarded?
Answer was yes.
Okay. How many other companies quoted that work? Being over $250,000, normally we would have 3 quotes. How many other companies quoted it?
See. We'll have to take that on notice.
Well, I heard one other company was $150,000 cheaper, but they couldn't do it for 8 to 10 weeks. Now, when it was awarded to the other company, they were 8 or 10 weeks before they started. So I can't see why we couldn't have gave it to the cheaper.
You've asked the question and that will be taken on notice. Any other questions?
No, thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions from councillors? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. There's been some recent conjecture in the media regarding e-scooters and the liability involved when someone riding an e-scooter has an accident with someone and then for whatever reason they may not be of legal age or have not been riding the scooter legally. This has caused a problem whereby the insurance of the scooter companies won't cover any liability damage. Has Launceston Council put any thought to this, specifically I suppose for e-scooters being ridden on footpaths in CBD areas where, you know, if there have been accidents, they've been the most likely places that pedestrians have been involved. Has Council put any thoughts into this?
Yeah, we'll take that on notice and get back to you. Thank you.
Very good. Recently in the news there's been talk from the Launceston Historical Society about their interest in the Cadet Army Barracks in Lower St John Street. What discussions has the Council had as part of the city deal with the federal government in regards to the future use of those barracks?
Yeah, I've had limited. CEO?
Council's had some investigations and conversations, and this may even predate your time on Council thinking it back, but certainly it's open to the owner of the building to engage with who they choose in respect of the future use, and obviously they're still working through their processes in what that will look like. Obviously, once they're able to relocate the various cadet facilities and the reserve facilities. So, I mean, it will happen in due course. So, again, it will really be depending upon the owner of the building as to determine that rather than the council.
Thank you.
Yeah, nonetheless, the owner of the building is the federal government, and that the.
Are you going to ask another question?
Another question. The changeover to go to Youngtown has been part of the city deal. Will Launceston Council be pursuing that change? And I fully accept that it's the owner of the building's right to dispose of the building as they wish, but considering that there is considerable community interest, will the council pursue the possible outcomes, I suppose, with the federal government?
Well, I didn't follow fully the question. Like, in terms of pursuing the outcomes, we are working as a City Deal member to facilitate the cadet facilities relocating to Newnham,
and Youngtown.
And then you've got the reserves will be relocating to the centralised facility in Youngtown. So we are seeing those and working with various stakeholders to see that through. That hasn't extended to conversations at this point around the future of the Barrack building, and obviously that's something we're happy to have conversations. There's certainly no plans from council at this point in respect to that building, but again, it's really a matter for the federal government to determine what they want to do in terms of their process, but obviously they need to resolve the establishment of the facilities to relocate the cadets to in the first instance.
Thank you. Any other questions? No other councillors' questions? Well, we'll move right along to Community and Place Network, Homeless Advisory Committee, Terms of Reference. So there's a recommendation moved Councillor Walker, seconded Councillor Dawkins. Do you wish to speak to Councillor Walker?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I do. Just in order to welcome these terms of reference that have been workshopped with councillors, that have been devised by our council staff, and the work that they've done in conjunction with other supporting bodies, and noting that the membership list of the advisory committee is there, and it is quite an esteemed list of service providers, the process, that has begun, hopefully coming to fruition soon, where these people can meet and these groups can meet together with some impending community representatives as well, and for the council to put this on a firm footing going forward. So well done, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you. Yes, the purpose is laid out in this item to enable collaboration and identify, support and coordinate actions, and develop a greater understanding of the roles and responsibilities, but also, of course, the objective to develop the homelessness action plan for council. We've seen in this term of council action plans work well. There's often a lot of interest in the first year that we develop a plan and then we implement them according to our budgetary constraints over the ensuing years. What I have noticed is that sometimes once that initial interest wears off, we're grasping to look for funding to be able to enable actions, and I think it's incredibly important that this time we don't lose sight of what our objectives are and we ensure that we do have funding to make sure that we do have an action plan that's robust, that has deliverables, that has KPIs, and has a meaningful way to be able to help the most vulnerable people in our community and to help council understand its place in this ecosystem, because at the moment it's not clear, and we're hearing more and more, as we have today, that issues around housing and around the planning scheme often lead back to, but what are we doing about homelessness? So for me, the action plan is incredibly important, and we look forward to the support of council officers, the agencies and the individuals who have put their hand up for this committee. And for those people who applied but missed out, there's always a pathway to my door to have a conversation about this. We can feed this sort of information into this committee and make sure that all voices are heard.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Of course, we need to remember that we passed the terms of reference on the 16th of June. This isn't the first time that we've seen them. There are simply 3 slight errors that, since the officers have been working a little more in depth in this space, have identified that would further support the terms of reference that we endorse. So all that we're doing is we're amending the existing terms of reference for this committee, changing the number of community reps from 4 to 6, adding Catholic Care Tas as an additional agency, and more clearly looking at the length of time that council laws, the 2 that will be determined in a subsequent item, will spend on the committee to ensure that that's in line with our other committee structures.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker, wish to close?
Thank you for that reminder, Deputy Mayor, that indeed there have been those changes and there has been workshop with councillors. But was it also the case that we invited members of adjoining councils, and indeed we do have a representative from West Tamar Council, which I'm not sure is, correct me if I'm wrong, in the terms of reference. Should that be there, or have I missed something? It is in there, that's great. So, yeah, just noting that also, that invitation was extended and accepted by West Tamar Council. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. So 14.2, Homeless Advisory Committee, confirmation and mem. We'll need to have a vote in this one, but someone happy to move the motion? We'll move the motion first, don't we, or not? Yeah. Move Councillor Harris, seconded. Councillor Spencer. Do you wish to speak first, or do you want to just do, we've got to suspend orders to do the voting? We'll do that first now, suspend the orders, standing orders, and we'll do some voting for the council reps. We have 3 nominations. I think we're getting voting slips, are we? I haven't got one. Sorry, we need a motion to suspend the standing order. Move Councillor Harris, seconded Councillor Walker. All those in favour? That's carried by all councillors. Now we've done it. Yeah, 3 nominations. Any other more nominations while we're here? No? Yeah. Councillor Dawkins, Councillor Walker, Councillor Priest. They're the 3 nominations. So we'll vote 1, 2, 3. No, we're giving some paper around. And that'll be counted.
Hanging Chad.
Sorry? 1, 2, 3. 1 your preferred candidate. Go back now or just wait till the vote? We are collecting the voting ballots. Pretty hard for those listening. Sorry about that. We'll probably now have a 5-minute break while the votes are counted, so we'll do that and then come back so people can stretch their legs. We'll be back in 5 minutes, which is 1:52, I think, eh? Thank you. We're going back to 1:52, so we'll reconvene the meeting. And just to say the election results were Councillor Dawkins and Priest were elected to that committee. So now, Councillor Harris, if we go, do we have to have a motion to go back to standing orders? And someone happy to move that first? Councillor Harris, seconded Deputy Mayor. All those in favour? That is carried. Now, Councillor Harris, if you're happy to move the motion that we move, but with those two names in there, you happy for that?
I am indeed, that the motion be amended to include the names of Councillor Dawkins and Councillor Priest.
Thank you. And
along with the 6 members.
Yeah, the rest is the same. So, Councillor Spencer, are you happy with that? As seconder? Thank you. So that's the motion we now have on the table. You wish to speak to it, Councillor Harris?
I will. And congratulations to Councillor Dawkins and Councillor Priest in being elected to our very first Homelessness Advisory Committee, along with the representatives from the organisations who work in that space, and along with our 6 named community representatives who have been elected for a period of 2 years. Our councillors are simply being elected till the end of this current term, when they'll then be perhaps re-elected, should they be successful in the next upcoming council election. So this is, I guess, another step along the way of the council's response by creating a homelessness advisory committee to in fact advise council on what it should be doing. And I think it's very important that this is happening within our city, because obviously we have very good evidence of homelessness. We know it's not just a city-wide problem here in Launceston, but in fact throughout the whole world, the problem of homelessness continues to grow. And so our solutions do not need to be, whilst they need to be tailored to our local environment, we can look at what else is happening in the world and perhaps use the experience of others to help those who are homeless, who find themselves homeless here. I do think this is a great step forward, but I also just like to point out that the Benevolent Society have reopened the showering facilities they were using at the YMCA in Kings Meadows as part of the council's response to the homelessness situation, and we didn't need to wait for the creation of this committee to do that, and council is to be commended for making that possible, because it is something that for those people, and most of the people, according to the CEO of the Benevolent Society, who will use those showers are in fact people who are living in their cars. So they would in fact drive to the Benevolent Society to perhaps get food, and then they'll be able to go and have a shower. And I'm sure that makes them feel much better, as well as increases their possibilities of getting out of that situation by either getting a job and or getting into another rental accommodation. So happy that this report, and I wish our 2 council members the best when they go and meet with the first meeting, and we'll look forward to hearing some positive results from the committee.
Thank you. Councillor Spencer. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor. You've heard me say this before, but I'll reiterate it. We'll never be able to do too much in this space. There's always going to be work to do in the homelessness space. And I guess further to what the previous speaker has said, I'm really proud of the way that our council is really working, continuing to work in this space. I think it's really important to note that the advisory committee was already working, at least talking, and I think what this does is formalise what it is that they're being tasked to do. One of our councillors will have the job of chairing the committee, and it will be very important that some of those big organisations are, of course, allowed to have their say, but equally, if not more important, that those with lived experience have the opportunity to be heard at those meetings. I appreciated the community representation, the applications that were received. I was a little disappointed with one of the comments in the officer's report that said some of these applications are currently represented in the existing homelessness response group and have provided great value and alignment to the purpose of the committee. I hope that didn't come into the scoring, because that's not what the scoring was about. It was about encouraging members of the public with lived experience to come forward, to put their name forward, whether they'd been on the advisory committee before or not. That was irrelevant. So I was a little disappointed to see that commentary in the report. But regardless, I feel very sure that the 6 people that have been selected with their various experiences will be welcomed, will be valued, and will have the opportunity to share firsthand their experience either of being homeless themselves or having people that they know and love going through homelessness, that their story, their bravery, their impact will be able to help shape what it is that we collectively, with the services who are in the room, who are funded in most cases to carry out this work, or with those that have direct lines to government through their grants and MOUs, will be able to improve the levels of homelessness in our community and advocate for those that so often don't have a voice of their own in this space. So really proud of the work that our council is undertaking, looking forward to having regular reports back to our council, and importantly looking forward to the option, as is reported in the report, with ways that other parts of our organisation can come in and out as needed when particular issues arise or particular needs for expertise or information arise. You know, it's not just one part of council that has responsibility for this, it's all parts. It's not just the two councillors on the committee, it's all councillors. So I'm really looking forward to hearing the way that collaboratively council, together with the service providers and importantly those with personal lived experience, can work collaboratively to improve this space.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Harris, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. Move on to 15.1, Queen Victoria Museum and Art Gallery report. Moved Deputy Mayor. Is there seconded by Councillor Walker? Wish to speak to it, Deputy Mayor?
Just briefly, Mayor, obviously good to see. May there be more of it. May there be more growth. May there be more community programs. May there be more engagement with our QV Mag, with its community offerings and the like. But I think importantly, the high-level detail is over 15,000, almost 16,000 visitors attended both sites from May through to June, which is a great outcome when you consider the kind of world that we're operating in terms of COVID and all of the restrictions and the impacts that is having. Some really good numbers there. Just as bright are the references to the community programs, the reference to the Art Foundation and the work that they're undertaking in alignment with our Futures Plan, and importantly the Friends, which is also documented in the report. So we look forward to those numbers continuing to grow. We look forward to seeing how in further reports it's linked strategically to the Futures Action Plan, Future Directions Plan, because I think more and more we need to keep coming back to that report. How are we ensuring that things that we're doing, things that we're undertaking, ways that we're operating are in alignment with that direction. So that would be my hope moving forward, that we'll see a clear alignment to those 6 strategic areas, and that will be reported on to councillors to be able to celebrate and keep track of.
Thank you. Councillor Walker, any other councillor wish to speak to it? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. We move on to the Albert Hall Conservation Management Plan. Somebody happy to move 16.1? Councillor Harris moved. Seconded. Councillor Priest. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Harris?
Just briefly, the management plan, the Albert Hall Renewal Project, has prompted this management plan, and I think it's a very good document for the council to have to help guide the conservation management of one of its most important assets, and that being the Albert Hall. So I look forward to this being accepted by the council.
Thank you. Councillor Priest.
Yes, I would agree with Councillor Harris, and I also just want to encourage any listeners to make sure that they do have a look at the management plan. It's a fantastic document. I have printed off in hard copy so that I have got it. It's got a lovely historical conversation through it, and it's going to be great to see it move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillors wish to speak? Councillor Harris wish to close? Question, Deputy Mayor.
Thanks. Just, I guess procedurally, we referenced this quite a lot when we were considering the works that were to be undertaken. So I guess I'd just like to kind of understand, of course, I understand what it is and I understand what the intention of it is, but beyond the life of the renewal project and the current phases of that we're in, could the officers explain to us what is the intention of this moving forward in terms of future works, future budget lines, and the like? I guess, in summary, its purpose outside of the work that we're doing.
Erica or Shane?
So the document, we have gone through the redevelopment, and actually the planning scheme was the more important document in considering the redevelopment. This document is really about the ongoing maintenance operation of the hall, so all those little fixes and things we improve over time, that we have a set of guidelines that we know how to maintain and look after the building.
Thanks, General Manager. Is the intent also that further budgets will reference this with regard to requirements outside those capital works that we've agreed to? Is it also a thought that this document will lead some of those budget discussions, and staff are currently working on some of those things that are identified in this document?
Yeah, look, most certainly, all our heritage buildings, not just this one, has had a renewed focus over the last sort of 12, 18 months, so there'll be continuing discussions around investment in heritage buildings.
Thank you. So, Councillor Harris, did you wish to close? No. I will put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. So 16.2, end of trip, waste management for the Town Hall. Is there a mover for that? Councillor Harris, seconded. No seconder? It lapses. Oh, Councillor Soward, thank you. Councillor Harris, wish to speak to it?
I will briefly. So we are back where we were 2 weeks ago, where we have a request for us to have consider the upgrading of the waste management facilities for the Town Hall building here, and also provide some end-of-trip facilities for staff. When this was first brought to the council, I believe it was probably back in 2013 or 2014. Certainly well before my time on council, and it has been a long-held request that has, I guess, continually been bumped off council's work schedule, as it was it benefited the staff and the council operations, and perhaps we gave greater focus in time to other things to spend our capital on, whether it be roads or other such things. So this matter came back, has now been tendered. Well, we attempted to get a tender back in the end of last year, but we were unable to get a tenderer. We then commenced discussions with one particular builder who we were aware might have a space in his building program because of the delaying of one of their other projects out at the tennis centre. And so a discussion between the council and led by the CEO, we have come back with a tender price, which is an all-encompassing tender price to do this work. And so we do not have 3 tenders as we would normally have. We only have the one, and that is our decision today. Are we happy to accept one tender rather than go to the market and force 3 or try to get two others? We have been down that track before and failed. And that really is the decision we're making. It's not a decision about whether we should or shouldn't have showers and new waste management facilities here at the Town Hall. That decision had already been made, and in fact, at my very first meeting, when I joined council in 2018, staff and others had mentioned to me that this was coming. And as a cyclist, I look forward to the opportunity to be able to use it. However, after nearly 4 years, that is still not the case. And I, like other staff members, if they have to change when they come to work, have to use the toilets to do so. And that is simply not what should happen in a modern building. Now, we know that when a new building is built, such as federal government office standards, and I had mentioned before that when I first moved into a federal government office, there was a shower there more than 30 years ago. So we are a long way behind what federal government office standards are. But I had also had explained to me by a builder that in fact what tends to happen is the federal government will set the standard, the state government will follow 10 years later and the local council might follow some 10 or more years after that. As it's been more than 30 years since showers were made part of the federal government office standard, perhaps it's about time we looked after our staff, because that in fact is what this will benefit. It will benefit the 250 employees here at the council and also make the collection and removal of the waste and recycling much more efficient for the council. So I'm happy to take a single price at this point as a tender. It is within scope from where we had a building survey report which said this was going to be the price in 2020. It was then escalated by 18%, and we then have our new tendered price is less than that 18% escalation. Interestingly, just yesterday I noticed that they were talking about the cost of building, and I'm not sure whether it was just in Tasmania or in Australia, had gone up 20% in the past year. So when you think about it, if we're getting it for less than 18% on a fixed price contract, I think we should grab it. It will never be as cheap to build it as what it is now. And so that is where I'm sitting with it, and I do hope that other councillors can see the benefit of it. It will benefit staff, it will benefit those who are involved in our waste management, but it will also be an opportunity to do it now at the lowest cost. I don't believe that we will get it done cheaper if we wait another 12 months or longer. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Soward. Thank you. Councillor Spencer.
Last week I had two builders contact me about this actually, and they said, well, we wouldn't tender in December, why would you tender a month before Christmas? We're that busy, that's why they didn't tender for it. But what my bitch is about this is we only went to one person. You know, if we went to 3 building companies and said, give us a price, I wouldn't have a problem. But to go to one without giving everyone else the opportunity is totally wrong. Don't care what anyone says. Totally, totally wrong. I can't see why this can't go back to tender. I'm a tradie. I've seen the down times. It does get quiet, and it will get quiet again. This project, it's not urgent. We've been waiting for years for it. It should be put out to tender again. I'm a tradie. If some electrician got a job for $550,000 and it was the only one that got a phone call about it, I'd be peed off. And some of these builders are peed off. Honestly, it should go back to tender, and then I'll be happy. But why did we only get one phone call to one builder? That's what I don't like. They are probably a very good company. They've got signs all over town. They'd probably do a great job, but it's not fair on everyone else. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker.
Yes, I abstained from voting for this 2 weeks ago, and I'll rise to vote against approving this today. I probably differ somewhat from Councillor Spencer, not being on the tender committee myself, but I do understand that process. Look, I think it's very clear everyone can see the benefit of it. Everyone can see the benefit of building a public shower facility as well. There's obvious benefits, and I don't think that's what we're exactly here to discuss at the moment. End-of-trip facilities, waste management, they're all very practical, pragmatic things. But if we look around, I suppose the times have changed from when this idea first germinated within council. There's a change in mood. Now, what we've experienced in the last 12 months, of course, you know, with homelessness is one thing, but we've also experienced budgetary pressures on the council, where we have agreed to raise rates by, you know, a reasonable amount over the next few years. And there's a perception that if we're doing that on the one hand, but we're also maintaining the current fiscal spending that we might have envisaged 3 years ago, that there is an inflexibility in how council respond to these situations. Now, in other times, when this was first mooted, when it was first applied for, it might have been quite reasonable. But I do think the mood of the community has changed somewhat. I don't think the need has lessened, but you could say the same thing about the workers in the library, the workers in Macquarie House or in the post office or in the public building, that, you know, there are a number of workers in the CBD who might appreciate the opportunity to be able to access, you know, end-of-ride facilities. Now, the council's problem is that, of course, we are an employer and we wish to provide those benefits to our employees, but we are also the community, the provider of community facilities, and that's where it gets difficult for us because, you know, our job is to also provide benefit for the greater Launceston population, and that's where the nuance in this becomes important. I don't suggest that our workers shouldn't have this, but I do suggest that there could be ways that we could share this facility with the public, whether it's access through a swipe card, whether people, you know, pay a small amount in that process to access these sort of facilities. But of course, it's within our remit to think about providing these things. Of course, that's not even to mention the idea that we might provide these for people who at the moment don't have a shower, indeed don't have a house. You know, so those times have changed. And I suppose the other thing that concerns me is that we are, of course, you know, I do not for a second assert that there's anything untoward in this process, that its intention is to be impartial, but our trouble is that we are not just to be impartial as a council, we have to be seen to be impartial. And that's the difficult thing to achieve, because it means that you have to go above and beyond people's expectations in your procurement and in your delivery of these projects in order for people to have a confident, clear understanding that there is no details that the council or indeed the public are not aware of in this process. And I know that's difficult. I know that that's not always easy to achieve when we want expediency, when we want to achieve certain results, indeed on issues that have been languishing for, you know, years in this case. But as I say, I do feel as though the community conversation has changed somewhat. Yes, it is important that we would support our workers, that it is important that we would encourage people to use alternative forms of transport. These are all important things, but the times have changed. And the perception is, in this case, when we are asking people to pay more for their rates, that we should also show that budgetary restraint, or indeed, if we are to spend money, that that benefit goes above and beyond just within these council walls. That's all I have to say on the matter. Thank you.
Councillor Dawkins.
So this is the first time I've got to my feet to discuss this matter. So the first time I listened to the debate, the issue was that nobody had applied for the tender, so we needed to find someone, which I understood. And then I heard another councillor say we were paying too much for it, that if we waited 6 months we were going to save $50,000. That's a different debate today. And then we're saying if we increase rates and spend that on improving council facilities, including recycling and FOGO, the things that we know that we need, to make ourselves an employer of choice. So we ensure that we have a contemporary council offering. We get the best people to apply for our jobs and give them the most support that we can, that somehow people in the community are going to take umbrage at that because we should be somehow instigating end-of-trip facilities for the entire community instead, which would cost millions and millions of dollars if we really intended to put a facility somewhere in the centre of the city for anybody who needs a shower in the city. Well, I mean, that might be a reasonable thing, but we would then need to amend this motion to include that. So we can amend the motion, of course, Councillor Spencer, to go back to tender if that's what we want to do. But it feels to me this argument is just going round and round and round in circles, and we're getting nowhere, and all we're trying to do is score points from it. This was a decision of a previous council. Now, we can go back and change any decision of council if we choose to. But is this the way that we want to do it? This is reactionary. I don't believe this is showing us at our best. We could certainly talk about this in future and come back and amend it, but is this the way that we want council to operate? Because to me, this is not us living up to our best. We have a motion before us. We can either support it or not, but just to stand up and say, I knew a bloke, he'd have done it for cheaper, doesn't appear to me to really be the rigour that we need on council.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Look, for me, this is about agile procurement. It's whether or not we understand that in order to get a project that is on the books, that has been budgeted, that has been through a process, that has been determined, whether or not we like it now it's got to the table. I mean, no one's ever brought it up during the process. It certainly hasn't been brought up through community budget consultation or through council interrogation of the budget. That aside, for me, this is about more and more we are going to need to do things and they are going to need to come to the table in order for us to get things happening in the city. Because at a time when builders are at a shortage, when things are at a premium price, we can either stop work and do nothing until that changes, which doesn't seem likely, or we can find ways through a transparent process such as this, asking our council to endorse the process that has been clearly articulated, the reasons for it clearly noted. We can do one of two things. We can do nothing or we can keep moving forward. And for me, it's about whether or not we support the agility required in the procurement process as articulated, as clearly spoken about for this particular item, or we don't, and I'll be supporting it.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Bruce.
In relation to agility within this process, I will be supporting it today. This council is a service provider. There are people going out into the community, surveying workplaces, other bathrooms, meeting alongside people, dealing with properties that have got chemicals, etc. When you walk around this building, it is a beautiful old building and it's not purpose-built. The change room that I inspected today that could be used as a parenting room has one bathroom, and you walk in the door and there's a big metal urinal in there. It's not a purpose-built baby change station. It's adequate to breastfeed a baby in if they needed to. And I know that's not what we're talking about today, parenting rooms, but I can't believe that there is no shower in the buildings here, not only because of the type of work that's done in council, but we have been in a pandemic. I have had to go to work, get changed out of my clothes, clean clothes, into work clothes, and then get changed into clean clothes in a public toilet during a pandemic in a hospital. I just think this makes perfect sense, given the type of work that the council staff do. I can't believe there is nothing here already like this, and I think it needs to be built now. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Harris, wish to close?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for all the speakers around the table who have expressed their view on it. I do think we have publicly proclaimed the price of this job, and I do think that any sense of fairness or otherwise for having a current tender project on this job has gone out the window. When you've already told them what the price is, I'm sure every tender will probably meet that exact price. So, to me, this is a simple matter. We do need to be agile in our procurement processes at this time, and I do think that it does represent value for money, because this building, as Councillor Priest said, has 250 employees. It needs to have money spent on it periodically to make sure that it remains contemporary for the staff that we have here. For every staff member we lose, it costs the organisation well in excess of $30,000 to replace them. And if this helps retain staff, as well as help promoting their well-being by encouraging walking at lunchtime in our parks, going for a run, riding their bike to work, riding at lunchtime, then that to me is money well spent. And so let's just get on with it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Those against? That's 2 against, so that is carried. Thank you. We move on to 16.3, Launceston Pump Track Assessment. I understand we have an alternate motion. Move Councillor Daking. Is there a seconder? Councillor Harris? Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Daking? Everybody's seen the alternate motion, I assume, or not? Yeah, they got a copy. Cool, thank you. There's an additional item, point 4 on it. Yep.
I do, thanks, Matt. I suppose pump tracks are one of my favourite topics, but in relation to this motion, I'd just like to obviously add point 4, but to quickly go through it, obviously we're receiving the report that was done, presented to us in workshop last week. It was extremely detailed, very involved, and I'd like to thank Phil, Bonnie and his team, and also Rob Potter in providing that very detailed information. Pump tracks aren't just about picking a bit of land and throwing a few jumps in. They're very, very detailed. They're about finding the right location, the right size, the right amenity, the right parking, the right safety and the right connectivity with the city. So in adding point 4, I'd like to obviously make it additional to include a property that we don't own and don't control and couldn't assess in the current report. So that is that we include a consideration for the option of site for a pump track in the Inveresk precinct and the newly constructed, potentially the new constructed UTAS car park. Ownership and management, existing use are to be considered, and should this be viable, would ask that it be scored in the current assessment. Now, why am I asking that? Is because I personally and others believe that this could be an ideal location for Launceston's first pump track. In that said, it's very simply, let's ask the question and see if there is land available, and if there is, let's add it into the assessment.
Thank you. Question, Councillor Spencer?
That was my actual question. Where would it be down there if we've got spare land without taking the car park? That's all I'd like to know.
Well, look, that's the option they've got to look at and come back to us, so that's not for today, really. That's just the principle. Councillor Walker, question?
Yeah, just a question. I note that the motion in front of us mentions Kate Reid Reserve, but yet at the same time we also have a list of 5 options, including Kate Reid Reserve. I just suppose I'm asking council officers, is that list ordered in preference, or is it is it a list of the 5 sites that were that are in no particular order, I suppose?
General Manager Shane.
I'm sure, as you can appreciate, this was a response to a notice of motion from Councillor Gibson, and we had some timeframes. I don't actually think we've met those timeframes, but I guess they're not in order of preference. They've just identified a number of sites that are preferred that we need to do further work to understand which is the most beneficial, plus the work on the next year's budget in terms of how do we fund it.
So just as an adjunct to that then, why was it that Kate Reid Nature Recreation Area was singled out in the motion?
So, well, Kate Reid was identified because it's been part of ongoing discussions in terms of particularly supporting growth of the new suburb. We're working through the opportunity to improve tracks and trails in Kate Reid. So we actually think that fits down the track, but it's not our land currently, and we've still got some process to go through to know if that's possible.
Thank you.
Councillor Harris, just to speak.
I will, and I'd like to thank Councillor Gibson for starting this process about pump tracks, because pump tracks are in fact part of our future recreation plans, I believe. Well, they should be, and I'm sure they will be. And it was interesting, the conversation I've had with others is I believe we will have a number of pump tracks, some which will be a very high standard and some that may be more of a lower community standard, shall I say, in much the same way as we do with our playgrounds, where we have our top of the tree Riverbend Park, but we also have community parks in the suburban areas as well. And as such, the very first one that we build in the city is likely to get absolutely hammered once it gets opened, because everyone will want to go to ride it. And that's been shown that those in other councils' areas who've done it. And so we do need to select our initial sites very carefully, with access to bike infrastructure so people can ride to it, with also car parking because people will bring their children to it and put the bike down. And this is in fact a good point for the additional point that we've got on our motion about the Inveresk land, and I believe it's near the northern UTAS car park rather than the half-circle UTAS car park, if in case people are wondering. And as such, it does have access to the bike paths that run through that area, and that is in fact one of the very key areas for it. And in fact, personally, I would like to see us having a new pump track almost in every future budget going forward. So I'll just let those in finance consider that. They don't all have to be absolute state-of-the-art big ones, but I do feel sure that over time I would like to see 6 or 7 pump tracks around the city so that every suburb has, or one that children can ride their bike to. I personally aren't a great fan of children having to be bundled into cars to then go to ride their bike at a park. I think if they can ride their bike to the park, it makes it much more sense to me. But very happy to support this motion as it is today. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor, and I want to thank sincerely Phil and especially Jackie for the work that was undertaken with regard to the assessment, the identification and then the assessment of sites for Launceston pump track or tracks. It was never my intention to think that we would end up with a municipality that had perhaps 6 or 7, but who knows? Who knows? What it was my intention to do was to say that this shouldn't be part of our future recreational offering. We are already behind the game. We should have a pump track now. So in supporting this motion, that this council would wait for Kate Reid to be up and going and the development in South Prospect to occur before we would see our city's first pump track. It would be my intention in supporting particularly points 3 and 4 that the work will be undertaken, and then come the beginning of the budget procedures, which will commence at the end of this year, the beginning of next year, we will see funding and have had conversations perhaps with other people with regard to the provision of some additional funds for a pump track that will be in the budget to start work July 1 next year. That is my intent. That, I believe, is what our community deserves. That was the intent behind me putting forward this notice of motion, noting that our municipality is behind the game with regard to the provision of pump track services for our young people and for the community. I don't want us to get sidetracked between having 6 and 7. I don't want us to get delayed by waiting for South Prospect to come on. I want us to do the work identified in points 3 and 4 to identify a site that we can begin turning the sod July next year for a pump track in the next coming financial year. I want to thank again, in sitting down sincerely, the officers, because there's some great work here, honestly. Let's not lose track of the fact that they have really put in a plethora of work to get to this point. And let's also not lose sight of the fact that there are going to be a variety of opinions around the placement of our first pump track. But I think it needs to be somewhere that is central, somewhere that's connected to services, and most importantly, somewhere that is safe. And that will be the necessary overarching criteria, I hope, when a council comes to determine the placement of our first pump track in the coming financial year.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Chair. And I thank Councillor Daking for putting forward this alternate motion and the suggestion that goes with it. I think to begin with, there's been some conjecture in the media that because of point 2, naming Kate Reid recreation area, that there was a perception that that was going to be the place that Council identified as the first place that we would be putting a pump track, and I think it's clear that that is not necessarily the case, and that is dependent upon other factors. And you will see, if you look at the report in today's agenda, that there's a number of sites that have been shortlisted and identified, including Royal Park. But I think that this And with each of those sites, I'm sure people can think of the reasons why it's a good idea and perhaps not such a good idea for each of them. And that'll always be the case, no matter what site it is. But I think most people are agreed that a central location would be fantastic. And indeed what Councillor Daking has suggested here is a central location, and one that isn't currently earmarked necessarily, even though it's surrounded by other facilities and functions, sporting and otherwise, but that it is central, it's accessible by foot or by bike. It's not requiring people to be dropped off, and yet it's far enough away from other facilities such as the skate park for it to have its own identity and for it to be able to grow into its own fruition. So again, I thank Councillor Daking for naming that up, because that is going to have to be part of the process that the Deputy Mayor refers to. If we want to see that expediency, we are going to have to settle on a location. We are going to have to rely on officers' reports in order to identify that and to finalise that and then to be able to vote on that. And there is a lot of anticipation. Yes, we are behind Railton and Georgetown, it's just the way that it is. But let's say we might not be the first to get a pump track, but we will have the best pump track. So, yeah, you know, I'm fully supportive of the amended motion.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Daking, wish to close?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to thank the Deputy for starting this process. Always a very good speaker, Danny, and I appreciate your comments. Councillor Walker, you probably took my thunder of the words you're about to say, but this is really just about letting the officers step outside the boundaries of what they were restricted in the first assessment. So again, I'd like to thank Phil and Rob and the team, because there is a ton of work here, and I look forward to jumping on the pump track soon.
Thank you. We'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. Move on to 17.1, the local government elections, and the CEO wishes to make a comment.
So just a slight change. Actually, the Mayor pointed out to me this morning and made a good point in respect to the draft policy, and just relates to the definition of caretaker period on page 62 of your agenda. So it refers to, at the moment, the period from the issuing of the writ of election, which is it's more colloquial, is how we speak. It really should say the notice of election. So I'd just have that small change, and that's actually the 3rd of September this year. So if council are comfortable with that, it's really just a small administrative change. So.
Somebody happy to move? Deputy Mayor, is there a seconder? Councillor Harris, do you wish to speak to it, Deputy Mayor?
Just briefly, Mayor, thank you. Obviously, we note that there are some councils in Tasmania that have previously chosen to adopt a caretaker policy. Recently, the Office of Local Government has written to councils suggesting to them, with regard to the work that's being undertaken, the review of the Act and associated elements of that review, that this would be whilst not mandated, a strongly encouraged thing for councils to do. I think it's best practice. I think it clearly sets out the expectations of what is expected. And honestly, I think in today's climate, it's the only thing that should be expected. And so I expect that all councillors will support it.
Thank you. Councillor Harris?
My only comment is that, based on the information, that the 3rd of September will mean there's only probably 3 or 4 council meetings that will actually be affected by this caretaker provision. And as the Deputy Mayor has said, all of the words that we have written there, the conditions, all make absolute common sense for any form of government. And it is something that exists in other forms of government at state and federal level to have a caretaker period, and it probably should also apply to us. It hasn't, but we're now closing that loophole.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Deputy Mayor, wish to close?
Just briefly, clearly says in section 2 that during the caretaker period the normal business of council must be continued, and that the functions will be carried out. But importantly for us, it also sets out in section 3 some things that we need to be aware of if indeed we're putting up our hand to seek re-election. things such as emails, resources and the like. So all councillors to ensure an even playing field, taking on board those things set out in the various sections as documented.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 17.2, exercise of 3-year option for Cameron Street. Do we have a mover? Move Councillor Harris. Seconder? No seconder. Councillor Spencer, thank you. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Harris?
Just briefly, the motion is that we extend our current lease on, well, I guess what is colloquially known as the Post Office building for our Launceston Visitor and Information Centre at 68 to 72 Cameron Street for a further 3 years at a rent commencing at $40,000 per annum excluding GST. It is a good location for the visitor centre. It is certainly popular as a building for many tourists to take photos of, and as such it's a logical place to have our tourist visitor and information centre, and the rent would seem to be in accordance with the local property market. So I have no doubt that this is a good option for us to extend at this stage.
Thank you. Councillor Spencer. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor. Yep, I think it will suit us for the coming 3 years. I think there are better spaces and better options, and who knows, when we reinvigorate the mall with regard to future projects, there could be opportunity for us to relocate the Visitor Information Centre at a time when other sectors, other parts of the tourism sphere are looking at visitor information centres. We know that this is an absolute face-to-face requirement of our tourism offering. We know that the business that goes through there is significant, and we also know that people who come to a heritage city such as ours still really enjoy that face-to-face contact, receiving a map, receiving a brochure and making some of their bookings face-to-face as part of the whole mix. Who knows, perhaps we'll develop a mechanism of our own for further bookings into the future where we take all of the revenue. Perhaps that could be an aspiration. But certainly 3 years will do us, and I think we can find a better location for our Tourist Information Centre into the future, but may it well continue for the next 3 years.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Harris, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. That is all councillors present. That is carried. So 17.3, the Annual Plan Progress Report. Is someone happy to move that? No, this is disappointing. Councillor Spencer, thank you very much. Is there a seconder? Councillor Harris. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Spencer? No. Councillor Harris?
I guess it's really just a progress report on where we're at in regard to our planning, and it's interesting to note the progress. At times it seems like things take a long time to happen, but when you actually look back at what we have, we actually see that things do move along, and I guess it's probably just the indication of our life plan that we, the lifestyle we have. Things do happen, and then we just, once they've happened, we just put that away and say, yep, it's done, we move on. So this is just, sorry, I think it's just a report for us to really note and move from there. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Spencer, question from the Deputy Mayor.
I note the commencement of the implementation of the cultural strategy is listed at 100%. I think that is being very generous.
Good.
Yeah, perhaps some further thoughts about whether or not that ticking a box to say the strategy has been endorsed versus the phrasing around implementation might need to be considered. And I suggest that's the case with a number of things. Even with the UTAS report, it talks about, even with the QV Mag report, so could we understand the definition of implementation versus completion to achieve a 100% score?
Thank you. CEO?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. And the Deputy has hit on a particular issue. A lot of councils strike this in multi-year projects in terms of being very clear in terms of what it is that you're actually proposing to be able to deliver in this financial year versus, and clearly the cultural strategy is a 10 years plus sort of implementation. So in assessing that, we determined what we had intended that we would deliver in that year. We have delivered that in terms of the strategy being developed and now in the process of being implementation. But clearly, as with the QV Mag, there's so much work to do in front of us, but we did deliver what we intended to deliver this financial year. But we do need to be clearer in that when we set the annual plan moving forward that council and the community are clear in these are the particular matters that we intend to complete in this financial year, and then you'll see obviously with the 4-year delivery plan usually how that will then carry out over multiple years. So hopefully that explains it too.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor, and I certainly thank the CEO for that. And it's not a criticism, it's a way, I think, of us moving forward, because that word implement certainly to many suggests that we're well and truly on the road to implementing many of the things that are set out in those large documents. And we know as councillors that's just not the case, that there's many hurdles to be overcome, many years, much funding to be achieved before you can do that. I'd like to say that this plan, again, reflects the diversity and depth of so many of the things that this organisation is committed to, and it sets out not only what has been achieved, but indeed the work that is going to be achieved. And I think it's a list to be proud of. I think there's something in there, honestly, for every resident and ratepayer. And it sets out, most importantly, I think, a bold vision for what it is that we're trying to create for the people that call Launceston home.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Yes, well, perhaps the Deputy Mayor's stolen some of my thunder now. I thought he'd already spoken, but he was asking a question, and I'll reiterate somewhat of what he said, just in regards to that broad range of priorities and strategies that are here. And I really would encourage people to look through the full list. It's somewhat easier as a councillor sitting here, voting for particular policies and strategies and asking that council implement them. But when you have a look at the depth and breadth, as the Deputy Mayor said, of these projects, you start to understand the diversity of what the council achieves and the broad range of skills that are needed for the council to carry these things out. Now, some of these things, it's a learning experience for our council as well. The things that are important to me, things that I've moved motions on in regards to an Aboriginal partnership plan. And I note that is listed as largely complete as well. That's a learning experience for all of us at council, because it's something the council hasn't done before, and there's many, many things here that are in that type of category. Whether it's working towards zero emissions and carbon neutrality and things like that, these are all new things that the council are doing, and they are many and they are varied. So I sincerely would encourage anyone listening to have a look at this list and realise that, it's like juggling, I was going to say 10 balls, but it's maybe more like 20. It's a huge, diverse list that this council is undertaking. And it's something that I take pride in, that our council is doing that. And I am amazed sometimes when something is brought forward by a councillor and it is adopted by council and it is something that then the officers have to embrace and find a way forward to develop. And that's what's happening here. Now, I'm not privy to all that work that's being done behind the scenes, and indeed most of Launceston's not privy to that. That work is ongoing. That work is the bread and butter of our council officers. And while I'll have certain interest in certain areas more than others, I'm sure everyone else does too, seeing them progress and seeing that the council is capable of doing this broad range of things that probably no other workplace in Launceston does. They just don't have that brief that they have to fulfil. To see that occurring is an impressive thing, and I do congratulate council officers, the general managers, and especially the CEO. I don't envy that position that they have to hold, and in order to keep these diverse things, juggling all these different things and keep the balls in the air. So, yeah, and by all means, if a councillor thinks that something is not progressing quickly enough, sometimes these things do take time. Change is not easy. If change was easy, everyone would be doing it. That's as simple as that, really. So you're not just reinventing the wheel. When you look at this list, you see there are things that this council has never done before. And so we're all learning in that process. And yeah, I will encourage people to have a good look at it next time they think, well, what does council do? This is what we do. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Spencer.
Just one little mistake there. They still call York Park instead of UTAS Stadium on page 235, I think it is.
No, that's not an error. It's actually formally known as York Park. There's a sponsorship agreement.
Was it?
But it's known as, but its actual official name is York Park.
Would you like to close now, Councillor Spencer? Or?
Yes.
No.
Close.
Are you doing a closing speech or you're right? You've done it? Okay. We'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. That's all councillors present at the table. 17.4, City of Launceston 4-year delivery plan. Moved Deputy Mayor, seconded Councillor Harris. You wish to speak to it, Deputy?
Just briefly, and follows on obviously with regard to the previous item, but specifically now for the 2022 edition. Importantly, I think the understanding of how this document flows as a result of our other strategic documents, notwithstanding those included in the attachments, the Greater Launceston Plan, the Strategic Asset Management Plan, the Long-Term Financial Plan, the Corporate Strategic Plan, the 4-year delivery plan. It's really important to understand we've done so much work in this space over the last couple of years to really align all of those future documents with regard to the 4-year delivery plan, and want to congratulate the staff on the work that they've undertaken to get us to this point. Want to also reference in the 2022 edition specifically the planned improvements that have been listed, because I think it's always great to reflect a continuous improvement approach, and that's certainly the case with regard to the attachment of the plan specifically. For me, and following on what Councillor Walker and others have said and what I said previously in the other item, that list of priority projects is pretty significant. Projects including the Albert Hall refurb, the Launceston City deal, the City Heart project, the relocation of the CBD bus interchange, the development of the Birchells building, the Greater Launceston Transport Vision and City of Launceston Transport Strategy, the Cultural Strategy, the QVMAG Futures Plan, the Master Planning for Urban Growth, the My Place, the My Future Plan, the Regional Sports Facilities Plan, Planning, the UTAS Stadium Future Directions Plan, the Kanamaluka-Tama Estuary River Health Action Plan, the UTAS relocation and the reduction of freight movements in the CBD, and essentially the toll relocation as part of the urban areas project. They are significant bodies of work, and they are only some of the very high-level things. They are the most high level, but there are so many things that this council is undertaking. And that list, I mean, in terms of a council that is forward-focused, in terms of a council that is strategic, in terms of a council that is delivering for its community, I'm really proud, and I'm sure my colleagues are very proud of that list. And a lot of these things take time. That is absolutely the truth. And what we need to be mindful of, and what future councils need to be mindful of, is that the more we keep adding to the list, the more we are departing from this strategic vision. So things that are linked with the provision of things that are on this list in terms of sport and recreation, things that are linked, strategically linked to our priority areas, brilliant. Let's try and keep our focus on the big ticket items so that we can achieve them. And the resources and the linkage to those documents further above the cascade effect, we can really fully realise the impact that all of these strategies and visions and bodies of work can fully deliver for our city. So want to thank, in conclusion, want to re-thank the staff mayor for the work that they've done to achieve the 4-year delivery plan 2022 edition, but of course the myriad of tasks and elements that get us to this point.
Thank you. Councillor Harris?
Councillor Gibson said basically all of it, other than to say that while he was talking, I was just reminded of a example where you must remain focused on the big projects and not get sidetracked on the little ones. And, you know, you put the large rocks into your bucket and then you add the smaller ones and then you add the sand and then you'll fill your whole day. If you spend your time playing in the sand and fill that up the bucket, then you won't have time for the big projects on top. And that's really what we must do as a council, and remain focused on those priorities as listed by in the report. And I think it's a great report, and look forward to us as a council moving forward on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Deputy Mayor, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. So we go to 17.5, budget amendments. Haven't got Councillor McKenzie. Move Councillor Harris. Seconded Councillor Priest. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Harris?
Briefly, this is where Councillor McKenzie, as the accountant amongst us, always likes to say about how we make the changes within the budget from the operational to the capitalisation expenditures. So they are just where we've made changes within our budget, either because things have cost more or things have cost less, and therefore there is a surplus of funds, and where those funds are to be expended under the new budget. So it really is an accounting exercise, but it is something for those who are interested can go and have a look to see how things get done within the council. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Priest. Any other councillor wish to speak to it? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 17.6, budget amendments. Moved Councillor Harris. Seconded Councillor Dawkins. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Harris?
What I said before, really, more of the same. Thank you.
Councillor Dawkins wish to comment? Any other councillor wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors that are present. That is carried. Well, they're getting less. So that's the end of this session anyway. We are now going to close council. Somebody have a motion that we're going to close council. Moved Councillor Spencer, seconded Councillor Harris. All those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is carried. We're now going to close council. We've lost a few. We're online now. We go back into open council. Moved Councillor Harris and seconded Councillor Walker that we endorse the decisions taken in closed council. All those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. And for the record, that's Councillor Dawkins, Spencer, Walker, Priest, Harris, Stojanchek, Deputy Mayor and myself. We'll now close the meeting. Did I show of hands? Did I do that? Yeah. All those in favour? Yep, correct. We'll now close the meeting. Thank you.